Good morning, Revolution, and welcome to our show. We're joined this morning by Dom, welcome, and by Anita and John Case. Um, and we're celebrating, still celebrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as we did earlier this week, who spoke so powerfully and organized so powerfully against the evils of poverty, war, and racism. And that's sort of our agenda this morning. It's kind of our agenda all the time, really. But we're going to start actually with the war danger. So Houthi forces in Yemen have been obstructing commercial traffic through the Red Sea to oppose the ongoing genocide against Palestinians. The U.S. has begun bombing Yemen in response. We should point out, in fact, that until the genocide in Gaza started, Yemen was considered the world's worst humanitarian disaster, now the world's second worst humanitarian disaster, bombed after the Houthi uprising by the United States and Saudi Arabia to a terrifying and catastrophic degree. Against that background, we see the threat of a larger kind of war looming in the region. And the position of the United States ruling class has been that they are defending freedom of commerce, right? The right of navigation, the right of the free use of the seas. I wonder, Anita, if we could look a little bit at the history of the U.S. ruling class support for free trade and free commerce with regards to the people of Cuba, say. How have we implemented, how has the U.S. ruling class implemented their free trade agenda with regards to Cuba?
Right. Well, of course, Scott, you know that the U.S. has imposed terrific sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela and other parts of the world. But Cuba, starting in 1961, and this is obviously a policy that has not served what the U.S. wants to happen, which is, of course, regime change. That's not happening. The Cuban people are accustomed to the benefits of having the government they're having, and they're not willing to let that go. But yeah, it's free trade for me, but not for thee in this case. And Biden admitted this morning or yesterday that the attacks on the Houthi rebels are doing nothing to stop the attacks on the ships in the Red Sea. It just goes to show that our demand for ceasefire is the pivotal key to all of these struggles, to try to get the what the New Yorker said was 10 conflicts converging into one big Middle Eastern cauldron of war. So the ceasefire is really the key that would put an end to that. And I see our list of agenda items says the working class that's able to stop that. In fact, I think that's true. I think the working class in this country is ready to demand a ceasefire of our government. They're not listening yet. Some of them are listening, but not yet. So I think that's the key to putting an end to all of these little wars that are breaking out all over the Middle East and really threatening to converge into one big struggle.
Thank you. And Dom, so the military operation launched against Houthi installations in Yemen is called Operation Prosperity Guardian. And that's kind of a break, I think, from the usual practice of the ruling class, right? Usually it's Operation, Bullshit Eagle or Freedom something or whatever. Are they running out of ideas? Have they just finally decided to tell the truth? Or whose prosperity are they guarding?
Yeah, I think it's fairly obvious to a lot of people, or an increasing number of people, just whose prosperity they're wanting to guard here. And yeah, I think that the name is sort of, it's funny because you're right that the names of these operations are usually like, like Operation, Sand Scorpion, and things like that. And so yeah, I think it's becoming increasingly obvious to a lot of people just what the interests of the U.S. Ruling class truly is in these sort of situations. And I think more, as these things unfold, more and more people will be, willing to, more and more working people specifically, will be willing to get organized and take to the, whether it's the street, the ballot box, and whatever the case may be, to say that we're just not going to stand for this sort of stuff.
Thank you. Um, and as we look at this situation that appears to be just spiraling into um, something more and more dangerous, before October 7th, the Middle East policy of the Biden administration was based on trying to craft an alliance between the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia to kind of bring Saudi Arabia into that orbit with the promise of military aid, advanced weapons, as we do with Israel. That's a non-starter now, right? So what's the what's the ruling class trying to accomplish here, John Case? What's their what are they doing? What's the plan?
Well, I mean, they're trying to secure oil, and they're institutionally committed to oil politics probably for most of a century. And I'm not sure the State Department or the Commerce Department knows anything else to do but protect, energy routes. Obviously, the attacks on the shipping routes are intended to basically restart inflation and the supply chain problems and make it cost the United States, the biggest energy consumer of everybody. And so I think you can't separate it from oil politics on the one hand, but I would just caution folks about. We had a good discussion in our Central Labor Council, last month actually, on a resolution that actually originated with the steelworkers retirees, calling for a ceasefire, and we raised it under good and welfare, and we took a straw poll. Central Labor Councils are widely discouraged from taking independent positions without consultation with the state and national leadership. But nonetheless, we there was a lot of, not everybody agreed about many aspects of the thing, but everybody did agree that the most compelling argument for a ceasefire was that the way things were going, it could kill Biden's chances of reelection and cause the reelection of Trump, who, for tactical reasons, could, without much difficulty, drive a truck through these contradictions that are, if he still has any senses left at all, But so I think it's a highly dangerous moment. I noticed that the leadership to discussions in West Virginia anyway, which may not be like every place else, there's a lot of nervousness in the AFL-CIO leadership about, factions that could cause the strength of the strike movement from the summer and all that revving up to fragment and destroy, help, not do either strengthen or will it strengthen this resolution, Biden's campaign, or will it weaken it? And if we're going to if you don't know for sure, how are you going to negotiate it with him? What's the best way to take it? I think that's a decision that the labor movement will have to make carefully. And keep in mind, you have industrial unions can do one thing, okay, and they tend to think much more independently, not always left or right, but independently. And some of the other unions, government workers, for example, people in the military industries, they're going to be reluctant to challenge the president, especially if there's good jobs coming down the road in those directions. So, and the threat of a splits in the FL is always there because of contradictions in the economy and everything else. And if they are not united, they can't accomplish a single thing. Okay,
And,
so
and that's,
those
yeah,
pressures.
that's absolutely true. That's the basis of, I think, of moving forward uh, on the ceasefire question. Looking at it as, um, I would say, you looking at it not as in terms of the dangers of it, but as something that it is absolutely necessary to win in order to secure the unity of the movement against fascism. And we have to figure out how to deal with with these contradictions, because um, a regional war or a world war would be absolutely devastating to the working class. Already, the consequences, as you mentioned, John, in terms of the supply chain, are going to make it harder and harder on working class folks. Are going to drive, are going to give corporations a price to drive. An excuse to drive prices up even farther. The ceasefire is something we have to win to move forward on this, as Anita said, and the fight against fascism is it's looming, right? It's Trump won the Iowa caucuses despite having 91 felony charges pending against him, um, and this the threat is something that we can't ignore. Um, there was an article in the New York Times, I don't know, a couple days ago that started off with the first sentence: "The working class voters handed the Republican Party to Donald J. Trump," and that's a hell of a thing to drop on a communist first thing in the morning. Um, is it is that true, Don? Is that your sense of um, the changes in the Republican Party and the rise of the fascist threat?
Uh, no, not at all. I don't. I mean, I've looked at some stats and figures, and it's, a lot of it's hard to sort of statistically gauge working class versus not working class. I think because obviously income doesn't necessarily denote someone's class position. But if you do look at income from the stratification of of income versus in the 2020 election, Trump versus Biden, that people of lower income tended to vote for Biden as opposed to Trump, and people of higher income tended to vote for Trump over Biden. So, I mean, if that's any indication of class position, maybe a small indication of class position, then no, most working people voted for Biden over Trump. So I'm just not sure where that that stat came from. If you really look at the numbers there, I think that there's definitely people who are um, disenfranchised or they're disillusioned. I mean to say, with the political system, and perhaps were supporters of the Democrats and flipped to Trump. I know that that was the case for some Bernie supporters, but I don't think that it was an overwhelming number of people at all.
Yeah, and this, I think you're right, and this is part of a larger kind of story that's being told about um, what is referred to as the working class in relation to Trump, in relation to fascism, in relation to white supremacy, um, and when we talk about the working class, we have to be really clear who we mean, because who we mean as Marxists, as communists, when we talk about the working class, is not usually the definition that journalists in bourgeois publications are using. Anita, could you tell us a little bit about those differences? How and why are they important?
Well, I think they're really important to know what you're talking about. I read that New York Times article, and they seem to separate blue collar workers from white collar workers, and the so-called white working class from everyone else. So those are things that we don't do. We don't tend to use. I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it: an empirical working class and a normative working class. And sometimes in among ourselves, we use working class, a real working class position, as kind of the what the norm of working class is. I think it was something, in fact, that you said the other day, Scott, about the Marxist view of working class being a kind of a conscious of itself, in and of itself, working class. But the media tend to use college graduation as kind of a shorthand or a way of getting at something, but it doesn't really get at something. Now, this article really talked about college educated Republicans going right for the most fascist option that the Republican Party has to offer. And it does seem that when you look at the behavior of the ruling class, behavior of billionaires, they are lining up behind Donald Trump. And they always did, really. That's, that's where the strength of the Republican Party comes from, is those wealth hoarders that we see, the billionaires. Sean Fain, of course, in the UAW, one of my heroes, he made it really clear that it's the billionaire class and the working class. That's how he sees it, and I think that's closer to the way our party views working class, closer than what the New York Times, how it views it, definitely.
Exactly. Yeah. When we talk about, I like that distinction you drew between an empirical and a normative working class. When we talk about the working class, the cutoff is if you need to, if you depend on a paycheck to put food on your table, um, you're working class, right? If you don't have the private property that would enable you to make a living, make profits from your own work, then you're a member of the working class. Um, so the distinction between blue collar, white collar, college educated, not college educated, those are stratifications, differences within the working class. They do impact how people experience capitalist exploitation, but it's not the essence of it. And when we this idea of drawing a line between workers with a college degree and workers without ends up really distorting the vision of the working class, because you exclude nurses, you exclude teachers, you exclude people with advanced training in information technology who are working in production. You exclude all kinds of, like, there's a huge section of the working class that holds college degrees. And um, many of those sections did not uh, vote for Trump, did not vote Republican. And on this issue of the normative working class, we use the term working class to describe something that is in the fundamental interest of the working class, right? White supremacy, while it influences the working class, does not come from the working class. It comes from the capitalist class, and is used to divide the working class, to pit people against each other. So therefore, white supremacy is not a working class position in Marxist thought. Right? It's an attack, in fact, um, on the unity of the working class. So that's kind of what's going on behind this. The fight for a correct definition and for the unity of the working class. But John, Anita brought up the kind of the billionaires behind the fascist movement. Could you tell us a little more about that? Who are some of these people, and why are billionaires flocking to Trump? What do they see?
Well, I don't think they all are. I mean, I think some of them are, but the richest ones, let's see, Gates, Buffett, Bezos, um, Bloomberg, Musk. Out of those, I think they're the five richest in the United States, and I think only one of those is for Trump. But I think there's another set of billionaires that have their own agenda, and I'd be very careful about oversimplifying the matter. I think there's a division in the working class that no matter what your definition is, and the division is largely a result of contradictions over the past 30 years, and especially the people left behind from the unregulated export of capital and nothing provided in return that compensated people for the ruined communities and lives that resulted. And I think the grievances that arose for that are a big part of Trump. And as long as you have the kind of gulf and wealth in the society that you have, well, and those kind of class divisions, you have people with a lot of grievances and the people that don't give a shit about all the horse shit that's coming over. And it depends on what they're watching, what their source of information are, and what their groups are, how they're going to express that. And now we have what, uh, 12, 13 billionaires that run 85, 90% of all mass media, own it all. And and so is it an accident that whether it's Ukraine or the Israeli thing or whatever, you get a blanket of uniform, calculated propaganda that the rest of the world hears a lot of different things. For example, at Davos this morning, I just saw an article that Joe sent me that the consensus there is that Trump will win the election because he's going to play on all these grievances and wars and the inflation that wars cause and all this other stuff, and he may win. And I don't even know whether that's a setup for the other billionaires to say, okay, nobody's going to have any democracy, and we're going to run the whole thing. I mean, Bill Gates is coming into West Virginia, and he's got a plan to buy the state virtually all the
Mm.
energy assets, which is all the state actually has. So I think these big guys are making moves across the world, that are more powerful than we see, and of course they're bringing into under their toe, since the biggest seven tech corporations now account for 30, 40, 50% of the entire stock exchange, depending on the day of the week. Their value, nothing else has any value. No one's investing in anything else. And they are sitting there with profiles on everybody in the world that are richer than any government owns. So I think that, yeah, we have a serious crisis that's coming that they can't solve, that Trump won't solve. We have a crisis of freedom in every dimension of our lives, but what do you do without the right to free speech or the right to organize, or the right? Well, you have to assert that right. That's the only way to do anything about it at all.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that Don, we can kick it to you on this one. You and the YCL in Philly did some really great organizing against the Moms for Liberty convention, right? So how did that? Tell us a little about what that looked like. The fighting. How did you build unity, organize people in this fight against fascism?
Yeah, I think that the Trump and the far right threatened so many different uh, different people, different marginalized groups, and different sections of the working class, that it was really not that difficult to unite people on protesting Moms for Liberty, Trump, and DeSantis too. There's a lot of different goons there at that stupid convention, and we just reached out to those people, reached out to those organizations that represent those people, and say, hey, this goon squad is coming to town, and we want to show them that Philadelphia is just not going to stand for it. The Philadelphian working class is just not going to stand for this slime coming into our city and trying to pretend that our city is accepting of that, and that our city, that they represent our city. It's just, most of them were not even from the city. Actually, I think it was like a couple people from Philadelphia. A lot of them were from the surrounding suburbs. And like, we reached out to education groups, LGBT groups. Like I said, really, there's a lot of different sections of working people that really are vehemently opposed to the agenda that the far right groups like Moms for Liberty and Donald Trump represent. So we just, we were earnest about our intentions, and we were honest about who we were. We were honest that we were the Young Communist League, and we didn't really receive pushback from much of. I think there was one group that said, "Oh, you guys are communists, we're out." But other than that, the liberal groups, people who wouldn't necessarily call themselves communists or even socialists, said, "You know what? The threat is so big here that we don't care who's on our side. You know, if you're against the far right, we're with you. We're willing to unite with you, and that's how we were able to sort of build that broad coalition of all kinds of people, all people, you know, the from the center to the our politics to the left, to protest Mom Shilbity and the far right goons. I can't say anything else but the goons in our city.
Uh, exactly, and that's what we talk about: working class leadership in the struggle for democracy. The fight against fascism is not the same thing as the class struggle, as John Case pointed out. It's not the entirety of the ruling class that's uniting around Trump. It's a section, um, but that section has to be defeated because they are dragging the entire rest of the ruling class into their orbit. Um, and we there's no progress without beating them. Um, we're going to turn now to another issue in the world of sports that I'm going to ask Dom to present to us. This was suggested by Dom, so take it away.
Yeah, so if anyone is follows the NBA, they're probably aware of the point guard for the Oklahoma City Thunder, who was last month accused of having a sexual relationship with a minor, an underage child, really. And the thing that's really particular about it is that the NBA stated, the commissioner, Adam Silver, stated that they were going to take a back seat to the police investigation that was going on. So there was no disciplinary action that fell upon this player, Josh Giddey, for the alleged the accused actions. And why this is particular and important to me is that there was another player, John Morant, who's a black point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies, a rising star. Very, he's the core of that team, truly. He was suspended 25 games, which is about a third of the NBA season, for showing a firearm, a legal firearm, on his personal Instagram live story. And that disparity in treatment between John Morant and Josh Giddey is just so. I think it really represents how black workers are treated uh, in American society. Is that, you know, for this white player who was accused of sleeping with a minor, no disciplinary action at all. The NBA is taking a back seat to the police investigation, but then you have a player who does something completely legal, a black point guard does something completely legal, it wasn't illegal at all, and suddenly it's about wanting to protect impressionable children. It's like, how can you say you want to protect children? You want to put out a good impression, good message to children when you're letting this guy who was accused of sleeping with a minor go without any sort of disciplinary action, but John Morant doing something completely legal, showing a firearm on his personal Instagram live story for maybe a second, maybe 2 seconds, gets suspended for a third of the NBA season. It's utterly it's just utterly ridiculous. And I think a lot of I've seen a lot of black people talk about this on social media, and I think a lot of people are resonate with Ja's story because it like I said, it's things that black workers face daily in workplaces, and if it's happening, it happens at all levels of society, whether you're an NBA player or the average worker. And I don't mean to go on a long diatribe here, but it happens in schools. I used to work in the school system. My partner's a teacher, and she said that it's what, half the school year is gone already. The police have come to her school 4 times and put kids in handcuffs. She works at a K-8 school, twice that she knows of. For
Oh,
what reason is there any reason at all to put a child in handcuffs, a black child in handcuffs in a K-8 school? In my opinion, no. There's absolutely no reason that you should be putting a child in handcuffs. So, like I said, to me, it this represents the sort of over criminalization of black people, specifically black men, that happens at all levels of society. And for me, the NBA, you would have thought they would have learned with the Donald Sterling situation. You would have thought they had learned with when those during the 2020 uprisings, those players threatened to not play. but clearly they haven't learned anything about combating racism inside and outside of their organization. And putting Black Lives Matter on the court is great. I love it, but it's not enough when you're doing when you haven't even combated the racism within your organization. You could put Dom is the smartest person in the world on your court, and I wouldn't care unless you proved it, unless you proved that you actually thought that. And clearly, they haven't have yet to prove that they actually want to fight racism.
And yeah, if you look at the statements from the commissioner of the NBA, the disparity is just mind-boggling. You know, when it comes to this white player, Josh Giddey, as Dom said, it's all, you know, restraint and deference. Oh, we're taking a back seat. We have to make sure his rights are protected. Oh, you know, we're not going to speak on this. And then when it comes to John Morant, it's you know, this public shaming, like talking about what a destructive example he's setting, talking like laying out like the kind of counseling he's going to have to receive before he's allowed to play again. Not to mention, so there's that kind of humiliation and finger
Mm.
pointing in addition to the financial loss and the loss of career prospects, if I've understood correctly, because he won't be able to be eligible for the All NBA team. Um, so, I mean, this is, yeah, it's a grotesque situation. And the players' union, the NBPA, has come out in support of John Morant, saying that it considers the suspension to be excessive and inappropriate based on the circumstances of the case and on past practice. Um, so, kind of looking at a different, I know, a larger picture. Talking about a union, talking about the working class. When we think of unions, we usually think of like nurses and teachers and auto workers and steel workers, not folks like John Morant who are making, you know, $30+ million a year, kind of as a base salary. So the first question, I guess, on that is going back to our definition of the working class. Are NBA players part of the working class? Um, Anita, you want to take that?
Okay, thanks. Yes, I want to answer that question because that was something that I really concerned me a lot. Did you did mean to call on me
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
didn't you, Scott?
yes.
Okay. That that was always something before I became a leftist or before I really became a communist. I wondered about. I think there was a baseball strike in the maybe in the 70s sometime that made me think, well, these people are getting a lot of money. You know, how are they the workers here? But the truth is that they are their participation in sports is generating a lot of money, a lot of capital, and who's going to take that if they don't receive it in their wages? The owners of those teams are, and I think owners of those teams are some of the most right wing people that we've got. You know, those right wing billionaires that we talked about in the last segment. They really there's a lot of sports ownership, sports team ownership among that group. So it really, yeah, I think it's they're making a lot of money. They're also putting their bodies on the line. You know, if you're a basketball player or any one of those professional sports, you're beating yourself up. You're spending your body basically, and you're not going to be working till you're 65 like in a normal, you know, working class job. So I think their compensation is in line with what they have generated for the organization that they're working with, and also the fact that they depend on those on selling their labor power and their body's capability in order to make a living, put money, food on the table. So they are working class, of course they are.
Absolutely, right? Uh, Athletes have nothing but their labor power, their skill, their bodies, their minds. They can't make money from that without the leagues, the courts, the networks that are owned by the owners. Therefore, they are members of the working class. And kind of going along with that, and looking at the role the players union is taking in defending John Morant. John, what role has organized labor played historically in the fight against racism? How is it? What contributions has it made to the struggle for African American equality?
Well, the origins of the CIO, the most labor unions, in a lot of ways, were segregated, and they were organized based, of course, in crafts up until the early 20th century, and the crafts tend to be perpetuated by families, communities, etc. So there wasn't a strong rebellion against race, except there was a rebellion against slavery because of the competition that slave labor presented to regular labor. But the distance closed after the upheaval of the 30s and the Roosevelt administration and the efforts of Eleanor Roosevelt. I think without the 30s and the New Deal, it would have been much more difficult for Martin Luther King to do what he did 10 years later, or started to do what he was doing 10 years later, and the movement that built around him. And then, of course, the auto workers joined hands with Walter Reuther, which was a significant move away from Lane Kirkland and some other people who didn't want to get in any trouble whatsoever with big business. And, the movement and the solidarity grew. And, of course, Dr. King's death in Memphis at the sanitation strike. What's important is what's going to happen to the sanitation workers, not what's going to happen to you or your job or your church or your life. What's going to happen to them? And, his message resonated deeply, I think, in the labor movement. And ever since then, I think the unity has grown. I think the celebration of Dr. King's memorial here this past week and the leadership, and looking at the composition of the leadership of the AFL now has also changed. I think there's a deeper and deeper and deeper commitment to a multinational recognition of a multinational, multiracial working class in the United States that is profound, is growing, is hopefully going to make the move to internationalism sooner rather than later. By the way, I don't agree that the basketball players are just working class. I think that's an oversimplified version of class. Most of us players that make hundreds of thousands of dollars, they invested in property. Some spend it all, but most don't. Most plan for the future, and they invested in property, and now they are collecting rent, interest, and wages. So their class identity, from a Marxist point of view, at least my reading of Marx, and which I've done a few times, but it's been a little while. I think you got to take a more complicated approach, a more complex approach to understand how class, a relationship to production and the circulation of capital as well. It makes. I used to represent people at the aircraft engine plant in Ontario, California. These guys went all around the world fixing broken planes and their engines. They could live on the expenses they made and bank their paychecks, and they made enough money to buy a house in Southern California, which normally, even with good wages, you'd have a hard time doing. But what they could do is they would buy two and then rent out one. And half the shop they were all strong union guys, but they were also half Republicans because they were now homeowners, and they were in support of California resolutions against taxes. So you got this complex, going both ways things that high income will generate. Even if it's originally from wages, you start investing in properties and everything else. Well, okay, you start to think a little differently about taxes.
Yeah, we can look at it in that granular way on a case by case basis, and talk about certainly you know, the attempt to use property ownership, encourage people to move into that small landlord category, whatever, as a way of dividing the class. But I think the important thing to bring out is, when we're fighting for the unity of the class, is that the basic position of these athletes is, in terms of where their money comes from, uh, is a working class position, and to emphasize that the fight against white supremacy is a core working class fight, right? This is not just something that concerns black workers. It concerns all workers, because if we can't, fight for, obtain, struggle for equality within our class, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to have any power. So our chance, our opportunity, the possibility of getting to socialism depends on struggling against white supremacy. And as John brought out, the labor movement has had a deep role in that, especially beginning with the founding of the CIO, um, which our party
I also
played
want to mention that the owners of these sports teams make tenfold of what the players do a lot of times. So I think it's an important thing to point out. And again, I'm seeing Allen Iverson on the screen here, and I do want to mention that this sort of treatment of players is not new. The treatment of Allen Iverson, who's one of the greatest Sixers of all time, I want to mention. Go Sixers! Obviously, I'm from Philadelphia, but
Yeah.
is the treatment of John Morant is very similar to the treatment of Allen Iverson. So this is not a new at all phenomenon from the NBA. And again, to bring it back to the sort of the issue of class here is that the NBA and these owners are profiting off of the backs of black labor, regardless of how much these players make. And if you're gonna profit off the backs of black labor, if your organization, whether it's a school district or an athletic organization, a sports organization, is going to employ black people or serve majority black people, then you have a huge responsibility to fight racism at all levels. If you're gonna use exploit black labor and you're gonna serve black people, you have to do it. It's not enough to just put Black Lives Matter on a court and say, "Okay, guys, yes, we're fighting racism." That's great, but it's not enough, especially when the disparity in treatment of players is this glaring.
Thank you. Uh, yeah, I think that's a good last word on that topic. And we can move to our mailbag maybe. Let's see what we have today. Why does the party support rent control as an economic policy when every mainstream economist rejects rent control because of its ability to decrease housing supplies and therefore fail to lower prices for the average consumer? Who wants to take a stab at, at this one? I feel like there's a lot to say here.
Oh, well, I will. Rent control was one of the most dramatic reforms and movements in the also in the Depression, because people were being evicted for inability to pay their rent, and then the rents because the houses became vacant, the prices. When it came back up, prices would go way up. They couldn't afford it, so there was only a way to control to be able to live in major cities, and it worked to a great degree in New York, and it worked in I think in the Northern California for quite a while, and even in Southern California, although I think it receded pretty fast there. But it's a product of a certain housing condition in the housing stock and in the level of poverty that you have. So I don't care what it is. If you're poor and you don't have a place to live, whatever it takes, rent strikes, rent control, whatever else, whatever the economic effects of economists who are making way much more money and don't have to live on the street instead of living in rent control. Um, well, you know, who wants to listen to that? I mean, that kind of talk is stupid, really. I mean, and who are they talking to? Just each other, at a cocktail party or something. Nobody else is listening to that. People who are paying rent say, what? Huh?
Yeah, mainstream economists say a lot of things, and they've made a lot of wrong predictions. Um, and uh,
Well, let me say also that left wing, that all economists have made wrong predictions. All right. So I think a little bit of humility on the subject of economics is sometimes worthwhile. But yes, I hear you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that this question sort of it it boxes itself in, right? It stays in the context of the market, as if the market is the only way of responding to the human need for housing, um, and it offers a really like a bad choice, right? Either you let rents go way up, and that'll encourage more people to build, and you have more housing stock, or you keep rents down and you'll lose housing stock. That's a false dichotomy, because you need to. Well, actually, I'm gonna stop there and ask Anita what the communist solution is here. What do we?
Well, sure. I think we see housing as a human right, not a commodity to be bought and sold. And I think treating housing, everyone needs a place to live. That everybody needs shelter. And to treat it as a commodity, as something that some people have private ownership over, and others don't, is just inhumane and against the need of society's need to provide housing for people. And I think rent control, well, rent control has been in effect in New York City for decades. It certainly hasn't hurt New York City landlords at all. But housing, really, our housing insecurity is increasing numerous fold lately. In fact, when the COVID restrictions on evictions ran out, that was another crisis. And just every year, we have more and more homeless people, more and more people in substandard housing. Governments have to supply some portion of social housing, that is, housing that will supply a secure place for people to live, and for children to be raised. Everything about life is much better when you have a continuity of housing. And this is something that rent control is one policy that tries to address this need.
Exactly. Yeah. The policy of the party is that everybody should have clean, safe, secure, um, affordable housing. And under capitalism, that requires rent control and also initiatives to build public housing. Um, but we could also look beyond that. Dom, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I think my immediate thought is like beyond the minutia of it all, like why would we not fight for something that would benefit workers just because some other economic problem may or may not arise? I think if we would not fight for Medicare for all just because it might may or may not lead to some other economic issue. We wouldn't not fight for canceling student debt or or making state colleges or any university or college free just because it may lead to some or other economic issue. I think that the economic issues, of course, they're going to arise when working people are fighting the capitalist class. They're going to find some other way to exploit working people via whatever economic issue or whatever economic policy. And I think regardless of that, regardless of the minutia of it all, we still have to fight for all of these sort of I guess basic rights that working people deserve.
And Dom has the last word. Uh, Thanks for joining us, comrades, and stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight.
You.
See you next week.
So long,
I
guys.